Hey guys, this is Anon, and I'm here to take a look at the SU-100M1, the Tier 7 Soviet tank destroyer. This is a pretty interesting machine, and it seems to be pretty polarizing. I've had tons of people tell me they either don't like it, or don't understand it, or don't do well in it, and then on the flip side, people that do really well in it, like I do, I really like it, and actually have always really done well in it. So I wanted to take a good close look at it because its playstyle is quite a bit different than I think your normal tank destroyer. This thing can brawl, especially when it's high tier. It can snipe a little bit, but it's got great DPM, good mobility, so it's a really interesting machine as long as you can kind of figure out the weaknesses of it and learn to minimize those. It's also that turretless tank destroyer, so it's great practice, I think, for those of you that struggle with those a little bit. Okay, so we're going to jump right into Tank Compare here so we can take a good hard look at the stats. I brought quite a few tank destroyers because I feel like the playstyles at Tier 7 vary quite a bit with these tanks. So I wanted to be able to compare those pretty completely. So I loaded up a Jagdpanther, AT-7, T-25AT, the SU-122, and the E-25. So I did even include a couple premium tank destroyers here, and that was just because they offer, I guess, kind of unique things in their class with those two tanks, so we can go ahead and compare them. Also did a pretty standard loadout here. Actually, I forgot to put it on this section, but I'm trying to set up what I think is most likely to be used for these individual tanks, especially how I would do it. So optics for me on the SU-100M1, because I'm going to talk about the playstyle a lot, but I tend to run it pretty aggressively. So binocs are not a way I am going to use this tank really personally, whereas the Jagdpanther, AT-7, T-25, those are all much more snipers. The E-25 is an extreme sniper. So I also pulled the rammer because I think most people are going to run a camo net with that tank, so it'll help reduce that DPM a little bit. We could also do vents, it's debatable. It really just depends on how you want to do it. I'm personally willing to sacrifice that little bit of DPM for all-around improvements, and the 122 has terrible gun handling, so we're going to put a GLD. So go ahead and go right to it here. The DPM is one of the things that stands out right away. When it's loaded out like this, it is pretty much top of the class, although you look at it and these are all pretty similar numbers, but the only two tank destroyers that top it for DPM at Tier 7 would be the E-25. If you're maxing the DPM, you can see it jump there. And actually the SU-152, I didn't include it here because you have to have the lesser gun, or the 122mm gun, I believe, on that, the same one that's on the SU-122S, and almost everyone runs the derp on that tank, so I didn't want to necessarily take that as an extreme comparison, but that tank with that gun equipped is going to pass up pretty much everything for DPM. The other main thing I want to point out on this gun is it is a 100mm D54S, which is a modified version of one of the T54 guns. So you're getting a Tier 9 gun at Tier 7, and there's some interesting things that we get from that that make it pretty, I think, remarkable compared to the other tank destroyers here at Tier 7. So jumping right into it to see what those are, we can look at penetration, and it is already near the top of the class, right behind the 20-pounder on the AT-7 for standard AP, with 310, very respectable alpha. If this sounds medium-like, it's because it is, like I said, just like the T-54, but what is really interesting then, when we switch to premium ammunition, we have this massive 330mm of pen on its heat, and that's because this gun, because it's a modified version, didn't get nerfed with the Tier 9 medium nerfs, the T-54 nerf, that saw it lose its penetration all the way down to 300 for this gun, so you get to keep that Tier 7, 330mm, you can get through pretty much anything. So switch to premium and just spam right through it, and you can see just how massively better it is than the other tanks. AT-7 has fantastic pen, and you are looking at almost 80mm, or it ended up being, what, 72mm of penetration better than the next best to it. So it's kind of an anomaly and something that makes this tank definitely unique, that it'll be able to get through anything. Okay, so rate of fire at 9.64 means, again, very medium-like. It's going to be able to go through pretty quick, but the nice thing about it, I think the alpha is still pretty substantial, so you don't necessarily have to stay exposed a lot the way you do for an AT-7 or an E-25 that really need to hide as much as they can because their DPM comes from a high rate of fire. So I always prefer those alpha guns because it affects your playstyle quite a bit. Shell velocity also very, very good at 1015. Because it's heat ammo, you're not going to be quite as impressive when you switch to heat versus all the other tanks that'll really kind of fly in, but it's still pretty respectable at 900. For heat, that's pretty solid. So it means you're going to be able to hit a lot of shots as tanks are kind of running on you. Moving into the gun handling, we can see it is, again, right up there near the top of its class for aim time. Only bested by the E-25, which needs to run and gun, so that makes sense. Obviously much better than the terrible gun handling that you see on the 122-44, and surprisingly better than the AT-7. Dispersion is not necessarily quite as impressive, but it's pretty middle of the pack. You can see it's still better than the T-25AT and the 122-44, but slightly worse than the Jagdpanther and quite a bit worse than the AT-7 and E-25 that have pretty fantastic handling in that respects, and also pretty kind of middle of the pack when it's on in rotation, which being a turretless tank destroyer is something you have to keep in mind. That's that bloom, so it's still going to be okay. It's just kind of middle of the pack. One thing that this tank struggles at, and I know this is one of the main reasons that a lot of people don't enjoy this tank, is it has an absolutely terrible 2 degrees of gun depression. That's horrible, and it's something you really have to fight with a little bit. The elevation's not a problem and very strong, but you can see it compared to a lot of these other tanks. 8 degrees on the Jagdpanther is pretty fantastic. 10 on the T-25 AT, which is a tank I really need to review here at some point, is absolutely phenomenal. It makes that tank really versatile. Even the 122-44, that's known for having no gun depression, has 2 more degrees than the 100M1. So that's something you're going to fight a little bit. They can't work the hills. It's really designed more for flat ground, or to use kind of low-moving hard cover, something that stays pretty low. It's also a little challenging with its 8 degrees of gun arc. That's also why I don't tend to use it as a sniper very much. I'll use it as a sniper when I'm low tier, but if I'm equal tier or high tier, I'm going to play it quite a bit different, and that's what we'll see in the gameplay a little bit. Obviously much better gun arcs on these other tanks that are much more pure snipers, and that's when you can load up the camo net and binocs because you're not going to have to break camo very often with that setup. So again, pretty similar to these other 2 tanks, but just something to keep in mind. Mobility is definitely one of the strongest parts of this tank. It is not necessarily medium fast, but it has attributes that makes it very, very mobile. So a 50 kilometers forward speed, that's very, very good. Definitely in the medium level. We can see some tanks beat it with the Jagdpanther, the T-25AT, and obviously the E-25 because it's just a burner. It runs all over the place. But it actually has a really great power to weight ratio, better than everything but the E-25, and its ground resistances are part of what makes it so mobile. The Jagdpanther might be faster, but in a lot of terrain it's not going to be able to utilize that, especially with the engine power. So this can really whip around the battlefield quite a ways. It's just more of a controllable speed, I feel like. It doesn't run away from you. You can control it very easily, but it's still highly mobile. The traverse speeds are almost best in class as well, only behind the 122-44. And I'm not going to compare too much right now to the E-25 because the E-25 really is just something that runs around. So it's a little bit kind of an outlier in this group, but I wanted to include it anyway. Last couple things just of note is that it is a terrible earner, 86% credit coefficient if you're spamming the heat to get that high penetration values, which you honestly don't need to do very often because its standard AP pen is really fantastic. But something to keep in mind that it will not earn credits, it will lose fairly quickly. View range is less than these because I had it set up with optics instead of binoculars, but again, unless you're playing as a sniper, that's going to be totally okay. A little bit on the low side with hit points behind the Jagdpanther and the AT-7, but still plenty if you're kind of handling it the right way, and not super heavy at 32 tons, so don't go ramming with it. Hull armor on this tank is something that's really laid out pretty unique. The hull armor which this is set up a little bit strange. I'm not the turret armor they have listed here. I'm pretty sure is set more as the lower hull. So either way, we'll look at it a bit here in Armor Inspector in a second. And actually, that's what I'm going to focus on instead of going through these values, because you can see it definitely has strong frontal armor up there with the AT7, and it's actually the same, about the same as the T25, but it plays a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and switch over to that because I think it'll tell a better story. Okay, so looking at Armor Inspector, this is set up against a similar Tier 7. What do I have in here? I have it set up as a Comet, so something that's going to see fairly commonly. And looking at flat ground here, you think, okay, no big deal, it's going to go straight through that plate. Yes, that's true, but if you're being careful about the terrain and you can essentially get hull down with this, if you cut off this big, weaker front, then all of a sudden all you have are these tiny little slivers on either side of the gun with a really large gun mantlet that has 210 millimeters of effective armor. So everything is going to bounce off that. Yes, at 103 millimeters, that is going to have a little bit of problems, and that will get penned, but it's a pretty small target. Even the 136 here in the front with its sloping, if you start to run around at all and get any angles going on, it bounces quite a bit, so it's very, very troll. And you have pretty solid bits of side armor, so it'll be pretty troll as well. But once you start to angle, if you're angling away from shots, you have to be careful because of this slanted piece, and it drops to 134 when dead on it's more like 170. So it's very kind of tricky armor, and I think because it's actually tricky is why you get a lot of troll bounces with it. If you sit still, the enemy is going to be able to pen you pretty easily. But if you're moving around and just kind of wiggling a bit, you can pull a lot of shots with that, especially with this big mantlet. If they're aiming at your hull and your hull is exposed, yeah, stuff's probably going to go through it unless you get some good angles on the lower plate. But if your hull is fairly protected and you're wiggling around, that mantlet's just kind of swinging and it makes it a little bit hard to aim with. And this is at same tier, and I think when it would be considered low tier, and that's when you can play back a little bit farther. But for me, this tank really, really shines as high tier, and I know a lot of tanks do, but I play it extremely aggressive in that setup, and that's because you really start to negate a lot of this whole armor, and all then you have are these small weak spots. So this is against an Easy 8 at tier 6, and it is going to struggle quite a bit unless it switches to premium ammo. So, and with the high alpha and the high DPM of this tank, you're going to be able to delete something pretty quick before it has time to aim and get through. So again, it's not something you could call heavily armored, but it has plenty of strong suits and it can be very, very troll. So you will get some bounces. It's just it's not something that you necessarily want to sit straight in front of a heavy and trade shots. But again, you have that DPM, so if you pop adrenaline, you're going to be able to kind of fight back with that. Okay, so let's jump into some gameplay so we can talk about or show basically everything I've been talking about with this tank so far. So here on Port Bay, and I am high tier, which is great, but there's a pretty strong platoon on the other side, so it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be a cakewalk. I'm going to do my normal thing and go over towards this water side here, although I'm going to take it a little bit different because remember I have no gun depression, so I can't work the top of hills, but I do have good mobility. In general, when I'm high tier or even tier, I really like to run this tank directly behind mediums. I like the mediums to be what's spotted first and gaining attention, but then I can walk around the corner with this incredible DPM and start to just kind of farm away, and I think that's what this tank does really, really well. It can snipe if you need it to, but to me it's more of a second line support tank, because if they're focusing on your mediums and you can stick your head up there, then you can really kind of delete some tanks pretty quickly. So I am sitting on the side of this hill right to start because I'm doing exactly what I just said, and I'm right behind some mediums. I've got a heavy rolling up to my right, and actually what's happening with this hill in front of me is I'm mostly hull down. That weak spot that I was showing you in Armor Inspector is pretty well protected by this ridge that's right in front of me, and I know that just from seeing, just kind of having good awareness and watching how these maps play. I know that there's enough here to protect me, so that's why I'm not even wiggling around too much. I'm trying to stay as aimed in as possible. The only reason I'm going to start moving now is because that IS is starting to aim in really close with me, and like I also said before, there are weak spots even in the superstructure of this, so if you give them too long to aim, they will find spots, but if they're snapshotting, they're going to really have a hard time with it. So because it can back up pretty quick and is fairly good traverse, you can always just kind of wiggle back until they get frustrated and then start to push up again, and again, that's what's happening. So I'm hanging in as long as I can because I know I can see tanks on my mini-map to my right and down in town, so I'm trying to focus on this. And I also know that good platoon that's on the other side is across the river, and those are going to be really difficult to kind of root out. And so that's always going to be a concern with that. So I'm swinging around now that I've taken care of all the tanks in front of me and trying to see if I can sneak a shot in there. You can also do the tricks to create artificial gun depression with this tank by backing up a hill and using your elevation instead of depression, and I show that in a few other videos, so I don't think I can start to use it exactly right here like I was saying. So I'm going to sit on the hill a little bit, so now I can point my gun down somewhat, and I'm trying to go ahead and get this taken care of. That's a really dangerous tank on the other side. Unfortunate with that miss, and unfortunately, that's why I go ahead and pop Drillin, because the reload on the Rudy is fantastic, and you can see once I switch to heat, I can just go through any part of that tank no problem, because 330 millimeters of pen is just kind of bonkers. Alright, so now it's 2-on-3, and I'm instantly going to go to the tank on the right because I don't, like I talk about a lot in late game scenarios, I want all of the enemy tanks to be in one side of me. And by doing that, now they're all in front and we can start to have a little bit more of an advantage. So I'm coming up to try and help the Tiger. The VK is off to the right, but this Tiger is pushing in, so I'm rolling enough just to be able to get my gun down, because it's worth taking a shot by that VK to go ahead and get rid of the dangerous 88mm gun on that Tiger. And now I can push a little bit harder, because like I was showing you with that T-21, if I'm wiggling around just like that, a tier 6 light tank is going to have a hard time penning me dependably, and so now I can go ahead and push in because I know I have the shot advantage. I can take that hit, shoot the HE, easy finish. So like I said, when you're high tier especially, and like I said, sometimes you just have to struggle through the low tier battles when you are the low tier tank, and snipe and hang back a bit until you can use that control aggression to run out, but it builds damage so fast that if you can play it aggressively and play it smart, you can really succeed that way. Okay, so I'm going to jump into another one here, and in this game I skipped the beginning, and I actually am blurring out the game chat. This is a little bit older replay because, and so dead tanks can talk, and this battle is pretty much just salt throughout the whole thing, and it's a distraction for what's actually happening, so it's not important. The team is splitting up because there is a large argument happening between Hill and going to town, but I have gone to the hill area, even though I don't have very good gun depression, because I want to face those mediums. Like I said, I want to run right behind our mediums and try and do damage as much as I can. This MT-25 doesn't really understand what we're doing. It gets a little bit annoying that he rams me and then he keeps walking back and forth. It's just bad awareness. Map awareness is not just paying attention to enemy tanks and where they are, it's also paying attention to your teammates. Obviously mistyped there, but then I just kind of give up. I'm just like, I don't really care. I'm just going to keep farming and see what I can do here. So go ahead and get the first kill, and the red team pretty much picked up that they were outmatched on the top and have started to, some of them, run down. My team in town isn't doing super well. Again, this MT getting in the way. It just happens sometimes. Not everybody is on the same level, so sometimes you just have to kind of fight your teammates a little bit to get through a situation. So I'm pushing pretty hard. I want to go ahead and flank this KV-2 because that's a dangerous tank, and again, like I have pounded on so many times, I want all the tanks to be in one direction. He seems to be the only one left up here, so once I finish him off, I'm going to be able to just focus down in town, which is failing pretty heavily. And that's also why I don't want to just go screaming in straight to the middle. Again, I am top tier, which is great, but there's no reason to just dump your hit points when your team is failing a little bit. It's definitely tied, but just by the look of the screen, I can tell that they're spread out a little bit. So I'm just going to go to the back and try for the easy shots or finishing any kind of low health tanks as much as I can. So the Rudy can drop right there. and then I can go ahead and turn and start working on these backsides. Again, the DPM is so great. I don't want to trade shots too much, but if I can do a 2-for-1 kind of deal and take off some of these backside tanks, I can. But I'm also wanting to be careful because I can see I don't have any help behind me. So if I get rushed, that'll be put me in a pretty bad situation. And just trying to pick off one at a time here is a good choice to go ahead and kill that Spa. And now I can go ahead and push through again too. I'm trying to just work the flanks as much as I can because these are tanks now that are left that have higher pen, and so they're much more likely to be able to get through my armor, and so I need to be careful with it. Angle out perfectly, and that's why you should angle as much as possible when you turn. You just have to be careful on this tank because if you angle a little bit too far, they get the soft sides. But if you're angling out with cover and you can put that front plate at an extreme angle, you're much more likely to get the bounces that I did just there. So now I want to play it a little bit more careful because there's two tanks. I'm basically a one-shot after taking that hit from the T-29, and if I roll around the corner with both of those guns facing at me, I'll just get double tapped and it'll be over. So because I'm the only one left, they clearly know where I'm at. I'm just working a little bit, hoping to get an angle, but I'm already thinking about relocating, and that's pretty much what I decide to do. I assume what's most likely to happen is if I run out to the hills, then they'll probably cap because I'm a lot faster than they are. I don't have good gun depression, so it's not an ideal situation, but I also know my view range as a tank destroyer with optics is most likely going to be quite a bit better than two same tier heavy tanks. So that's the idea. Walk out here. I know there's a good angle into cap, so if they start to do that capping scenario, then hopefully I can take one of them out, and if I can take one out, especially the IS, then it means I have a much better chance with the T-29. There's my minute of salt there, you get that, because seriously, you would be amazed what's been said during this whole battle. That's why it wasn't really worth showing. It was pretty brutal. So, but we all know that's what happens, and that's why I'm okay with the fact that the dead tanks can't chat anymore. So I'm sitting here, and surprisingly, they're not doing what I thought they were going to do. Actually, in this situation, I figured it was almost guaranteed that's what they would do. So what I kind of assume is maybe they're coming up one side or the other into the hills trying to chase me. I have time, so I'm not in a rush because they're should both be one-shots for me. So I go left because I feel like that's the most likely place that they would come up at me. And so just trying to get a quick look. That's why I roll up the top and back right down. I just wanted to get up enough to spot, and they're not there again. So I guess at this point they're probably still in town and playing defensive. I don't know. It's an interesting setup. The cap at least, and then have one search is more likely, but it's just kind of weird. So I'm going to go ahead and stay as wide as I can because I've got that view range, and optics means they're on all the time. So I'm just going to check where they were before, and sure enough, there's the T-29 exactly where I left him. He doesn't look AFK. He's moving around a little bit. He just thought I was going to come into the front. So I don't know. Who knows? But either way, I was able to go ahead and get rid of that tank. And now I'm going to go ahead and push in because I feel like I turn so fast. I can actually traverse faster than an IS can traverse its turret. So I'm hoping if I can catch him in the side, and especially down at now only a minute, I'm hoping I can whip around with that extremely high pen on heat and be able to take him out. He rolls through cap, which tells me exactly where he is, and so now I can whip, come in, use that traverse to finish him off. So again, this is a highly versatile tank. That whole Object 263 line is very, very versatile. Tanks that are fast, tanks that have solid armor, good DPM. You just have to manage the fact that it's turretless, manage the fact that it has no gun depression, and use the strong suits because they're really fantastic tanks, and this is one that I really enjoy a lot. The Rossini there that kind of snuck up, I had noticed it earlier, but I didn't really want to talk about it in the gameplay because I was kind of focused on other stuff. But hopefully this video helps. Hopefully it helps you understand how to work this tank, and really it applies for a lot of this entire tank line, very similar play styles. And you can go out and enjoy them. So thanks a lot, guys. Take care.